Good morning. Today I want to talk more about the war between Israel and Hamas and try and give some indications, at least from astrology, regarding how long this conflict may last. And I'm going to look not only at Israel's chart, but also Iran's. Now, the situation currently is that there is, at least at this point, no hard evidence that Iran was directly involved in this current attack on Israel, but nonetheless, they have been the backers and the supporters and exporters of terrorism that has affected uh, Israel and other countries for quite a while. They are the ones that back and provide support and weapons for Hamas and Hezbollah. So it's possible that evidence may be found sooner or later that Iran was directly involved in this attack. But even if they weren't involved, they're, I guess, complicit in other ways. And when we look at the astrology of Iran in the months to come, we see that there are going to be a lot of tensions there. So uh, we'll take a look at the charts for both countries and see what's likely. So let me share my screen here. And I just need to take care of a couple of things before I start. And I'm ready. So the big question is, how long will the war between Israel and Hamas last? Well, the truth is that no astrologer really knows how long this war will last. Many non-astrologers and even some astrologers tend to think of astrology as a tool for predicting the future, but that is not quite right. Instead, astrology is more like a weather report. It can show when stormy conditions exist and when skies will be clear, and this allows us to subjectively determine that some events will be more likely than others. However, just as when a hurricane hits a region, people have free will, and the way in which an individual exercises their free will has a big impact on how any astrological weather event will affect them. If they take precautions, then they can safely ride out any storm. But if they don't, then the outcome is indeed more predictable. Thus, in this presentation, I'll describe some of the astrological weather for both Israel and Iran for the rest of this fall and during the next round of eclipses in March and April of 2024. Also, the planetoid Chiron is playing a major role in the events that are unfolding. So let me briefly describe its significance in astrology. Chiron resides between Saturn and Uranus, and its eccentric orbit takes it sometimes within the orbit of Saturn and at other times outside the orbit of Uranus. It is the bridge between what can be seen, Sun through Saturn, and what can't be seen, Uranus through Pluto. Thus, it is a drive to transcend and go beyond the visible world. But in the process, it often has to first crack that hard shell that our Saturn drive has erected around us. And when aspects involving Chiron are tense, then wounding is more likely. But when the aspects are good, then healing and the sweeter transcendent side of Chiron are more likely to manifest. So keep this in mind as we go through this presentation. All right, we'll begin with Israel. All the charts I'm looking at for both Israel and Iran have good Rodin ratings. Okay, now here's the main thing I want to point out about Israel's chart. It has Sun and Taurus in the eighth house, opposite Chiron in Scorpio in the second house. Now, an opposition between two planets indicates two drives that are trying to integrate their function with one another. In this case, the sun represents both the leader of a nation and the soul of the nation. And Chiron can manifest as either wounding, healing, or transcendence. And to the extent that Israel integrates the transcendent nature of Chiron into its soul, it will be a light unto the nations. So this opposition here, it really represents the traditional mission of Israel to be a light unto the nations. And I think that happens quite a bit in science and the arts. Uh, but to the extent that it fails to integrate these two drives together, it will experience wounding to itself and to others. And that is happening more often politically than we would like. There are a lot of great things that Israel does, even some good things politically. And then there are, I'm sure, areas where it falls short. But this is both the challenge and the greatness of Israel that we see in this aspect. Integrate the higher aspects of Chiron into the soul, and then you will be a light unto the nations. Okay, now if we look at the general planetary transits on October 7th, 2023, when this current war began, look at what was happening. Sun was in opposition to Chiron. This mirrors what you have in the natal chart for Israel. And so this creates a strong resonance. This tells us why the transits on this day were impacting Israel in particular. You also have Mars conjunct the lunar nodal axis and square both Pluto and the moon. And the moon is opposite Pluto and square the lunar nodal axis. So these are the triggers. There is a lot of tension on this day, but it impacted Israel in particular because the Sun Chiron opposition mirrors what you see in Israel's natal chart. Now, another factor here is that Pluto has pretty much slowed to a crawl. It's stationary now, and I said it will turn direct on October 12th. Well, I'm making this after October 12th, so it's uh, it's now already turned direct. Okay, so with Pluto moving so slowly, that simply intensifies its capacity for destruction, death, and transformation. Now, if we look at how the transits were affecting Israel on October 7th, this is the main thing, which is very, very important. Transiting Uranus is conjunct natal Sun and opposite to natal Chiron. So again, that Sun Chiron opposition in the natal chart is being stimulated. Uranus can cause sudden, unexpected things to happen. And so we have this very swift, sudden, destructive wounding of Israel on October 7th, 2023. Now, some other tensions here are transiting Neptune. Right here is square both natal Uranus and natal Jupiter, and transiting Jupiter. Uh, let's see, right here is conjunct the lunar nodal axis and square natal Pluto. So that is intensifying things, and all this is intensifying the likelihood of something destructive happening, something affecting Israel's leaders, and of course, it being very sudden and misinformation being involved. Okay, on October 14th, that is when we have a solar eclipse. Uh, there's a solar eclipse on the 14th, lunar eclipse on the 28th of October. And since these eclipses are happening so close to the onset of this war, that is unfortunately intensifying everything and creating an impact which may last for months beyond the time when these transits are in effect. Okay, nonetheless, on October 14th, the day of the solar eclipse, we still have transit Uranus, conjunct and opposite natal Sun in Chiron. Still have transit Neptune square natal Uranus and natal Jupiter. And we still have transit Jupiter conjunct the natal lunar nodal axis and square natal Pluto. So the same transits that were in effect on October 7th, they're still in effect on the 14th, and they're being intensified because of the eclipse. Now, on October 28th, when we have the lunar eclipse, there are some of the same tensions and some additional tensions. We still have transit Uranus conjunct and opposite natal Sun in Chiron right here. That is the main thing behind this current conflict. Transiting Neptune will still square natal Uranus and natal Jupiter. Transiting Jupiter over here is still square natal Pluto, but you now have transiting Mars joining in, squaring natal Pluto. So this transit natal T-square will probably be reflected in a ramping up, an increase in tensions. Also, transiting Sun and Moon right here and here, they're going to be squaring the natal Moon. So that is going to affect the people more. And the transiting nodal axis is going to be squaring the midheaven. So there's some more intense energies probably surrounding Israel's leadership. Okay, now, if we look at just the transits of outer planets from October through November, that's what I have here, and I have the ones that I'm in particular paying attention to. And actually, I've got this not everything in here. I should have a square, a little rectangle around Jupiter square Pluto. But I'm going to be talking about this. This was exact on the 17th. So I was really expecting that something may happen on the 17th that would impact Israel quite a bit. Of course, Israel has been blamed for the October 17th bombing of a hospital in northern Gaza, and the November 5th opposition of transiting Uranus to natal Chiron will be intensified since this is the day of the third quarter moon. Also, evidence now suggests that the October 17th bombing was caused by a failed rocket that was launched at Israel. Today is the 18th, and there is evidence today that strongly suggests that that hospital bombing was not caused by Israel, but it was a rocket launched not by Hamas, but by another Islamic jihadist group in Gaza. They launched some rockets toward Israel. One of them failed and fell on the hospital, causing horrific casualties. So let's see. What I really want to do, I kind of move some things around. So this little rectangle, it should be not around these two planets, but around the next two, Uranus in opposition to Chiron, which will be exact on the 5th. And that's intensified by the third quarter moon occurring on that day. And that's when some additional wounding could be experienced by Israel. Wounding to them or to others, unfortunately. And then this rectangle should also be around Jupiter square Pluto, which was exact on the 17th. I was expecting some sort of problem. There's a greater likelihood of some big problem for Israel emerging on that day. And of course, this is when that horrific bombing of the hospital in northern Gaza occurred. Okay, now I also like to look at midpoint conjunctions and oppositions because when those midpoints are activated, they can be turning points one way or another. And the ones that stand out to me are transing Saturn is opposite the Mercury Chiron midpoint on October 14th. That was the day of the solar eclipse, so that becomes intensified. And it's also going to be exact again on November 25th. Okay. Meanwhile, transiting Chiron is opposite the Moon Jupiter midpoint on November 22nd. Chiron will likely manifest as wounding at these times, but could be healing or transcendence. And these are dates I want to keep in mind, keep an eye on. Okay, so here's showing where that Mercury Chiron midpoint is, and here's Mercury, here's Chiron, and Israel's natal chart, and Saturn is exactly opposite that midpoint on October 14th and on November 25th. And the war intensified on October 5th, 14th, and citizens in Gaza are unfortunately caught in the crossfire. Also, Saturn turns stationary direct on November 3rd, so it's going to be moving pretty slow for a bit. And as it slows down, its restrictive power, it's magnified. Its power to cause restriction, frustration, blockages, that becomes magnified. So I want to keep an eye on these dates and see if some unfortunate wounding occurs. Okay, now Chiron turns direct on December 26th, and is opposite this midpoint again on January 30th. So on November 22nd, we get Chiron, exact opposition to the Moon Jupiter midpoint. In Israel's chart, that's at about 16 degrees of Libra. So transiting Chiron opposite the Moon Jupiter midpoint may bring more wounding to Israel and its people. If we're lucky, instead of wounding, this could be a time of healing and transcendence. But again, as Chiron slows down, wounding may intensify. Okay, so we're getting slower and slower as we approach December 26th for Chiron. Now, there is some good news. A trine from transing Chiron to natal Saturn on November 9th suggests favorable developments for Israel and its people. Something healing or more transcendent may occur around this time. If we're lucky, this will be a turning point in which we begin to figure a way out of this conflict. Now, quincunxes indicate periods of change and adjustment. Hence, I'll keep an eye on what happens on November 2nd, when transing Jupiter is quincunx natal Neptune. That's in the 12th house. And November 20th, when transing Pluto is quincunx natal Mars, which is the ruler of the 7th house. These could potentially be turning points for the worse, or for worser or for better. So I will try and stay optimistic, given that nice trine by Chiron that we saw, which is exact, trine to Saturn, which is exact on November 9th. I'm hoping that things take a turn for the better in November. Now let's take a look at Iran. Uh, they may have been involved directly in this attack. That may come out, and that could lead to an expansion of this war. Or we may find definitive evidence that they weren't directly involved in the current attack. Either way, Iran is going to have some problems. They could be internal, they could be external. Iran could handle all of these problems successfully, in which case we may never hear about them, or it could be big international news. So we'll just have to keep an eye on things. Now, if we look at Iran's natal chart, well, with Chiron conjunct the ascendant, Iran has brought wounding both to other countries and to its own people. We've seen how its support of terrorist groups has wounded other countries. We have seen how its morality police have wounded its own people. However, with both Venus and Saturn trine Chiron, Iran and its people also have the capacity to be a light to others. So, Iran doesn't have to always be wounding itself and others. And I don't expect Iran to be wounding all the time. It also has a great capacity for transcendence and to lead the way for other nations, but it just has to make the right choices. Now, if we look at the relationship between Iran and Israel, it's not good. There's a lot of challenges. I've got Iran's chart on the outside, Israel's on the inside, and the planet that I mentioned first is usually going to be what's in Iran's chart, aspects from Iran to Israel. So, uh, Iran is conjunct natal Chiron and opposite Sun in Israel's chart, and Sun and Mercury in Iran's chart are square Chiron and Sun in Israel's chart. Okay, so that Sun Chiron opposition that's so important in Israel's chart, it's being activated all the time by Iran. And so far, it hasn't been a good activation. It's caused wounding to both nations. Now, what else is going on? Well, Iran's Mars is opposite, directly opposite Israel's Saturn. So that's very warlike and restrictive. That's not good. Also, Iran's moon is conjunct Israel's Pluto and square Israel's lunar nodal axis. So the people and the leaders of Iran tend to see Israel as their oppressors. They see Israel as they're the ones who are causing trouble to Iran. Now, additionally, we have Iran's Venus in opposition to Israel's Venus. So these two countries have very different points of views about things. And the bottom line is that these two countries are not boyfriend and girlfriend. Certainly not now. Maybe they can get better relationships, a better relationship with one another in the future. Let's hope so, but this is why the relationship is not good now and has never been good between the two countries in modern times. Okay, how will Iran be affected by the October 14th solar eclipse? Well, like I said, it has its problems. Transiting Chiron is opposite natal Pluto, and transiting Sun, Moon, Mercury are going to be conjunct natal Pluto. Okay, with Pluto representing death and destruction, Chiron usually manifesting as wounding, this is not an aspect you want to see. Right now, it's a couple of degrees apart from being exact. At least it's not exact for now. So that's good news. Now, what else is going on? Well, transiting Mars right here is square natal Jupiter. So that adds to the tension. And transiting Jupiter is square natal Moon. So Jupiter is involved in two ways, and Jupiter tends to magnify things. Bottom line is there's an increased conflict of wounding for Iran at this time. And remember that even though the transits on this day may pass very quickly, because it's a solar eclipse, everything is more intense at this time. Okay? So, new moon periods tend to be more intense than regular days, and solar eclipses, which are also new moons, they're even more intense than regular new moons. So, because of the intensity of the experience, the impact can linger for months to come. And that is why you don't want to see wars happening around eclipse times, because the eclipses just intensify the entire conflict and it may take a lot longer to resolve things. And Iran is not part of this war at this point, but it looks like it is going to undergo some sort of wounding and conflict, and that could be either internal or external. And like I said, Iran may be adept enough that it may be able to handle those crises and keep everything running smoothly. But nonetheless, those astrological pressures are there, and so we need to keep an eye on things. Now, at the October 28th lunar eclipse, it looks like things get a little worse for Iran. And some of the things that were present at the solar eclipse are still going to be there. Transiting Uranus is still opposite natal Uranus and square natal Sun and Mercury here and here. Transiting Sun and Moon are now opposite and conjunct natal Chiron and square natal Moon. Okay, here's transiting Sun and Moon. It's in a really strong conjunction with natal Chiron and square natal Moon, which is in the fourth house. That represents the people. So before the end of this month, for one reason or another, we may see a lot of suffering and wounding for the people of Iran. Also, transiting Mars uh, and Jupiter, Mars over here, Jupiter over here, are going to be squaring the natal moon. It's a fairly strong square, and that may beat the drums of war or conflict in some other ways. And let's see, what else do we have? Well, transiting Venus is conjunct the natal lunar nodal axis, and it's going to be square natal Neptune at this time. So the bottom line is these eclipses are bringing about an increased likelihood of conflict and wounding for Iran. Now, if we look at transits for Iran for the rest of this fall, well, transiting Jupiter square natal moon, which is in the fourth house, on October 14th can result in discomfort among the people. And aspects from transiting Uranus on October 22nd, November 17th. That's when those aspects respectively become exact, can create pressure for change. Uranus always likes to bring about change. So keep an eye on what Uranus opposite Uranus does on November 17th, and also on the square of transiting Jupiter to natal moon. Uh, that was exact on the 14th. That was eclipse day, so that makes the whole thing more intense. Now, if we look at the midpoints that'll be activated during this period, the two which really concern me are transiting Chiron opposite the Moon Neptune midpoint on November 6th, and transing Chiron opposite Saturn Uranus midpoint on November 8th. So, midpoint activations by Chiron on November 6th and 8th could result in either wounding to Iran or wounding by Iran to others. I note that Chiron is transing through Iran's 12th house, and these midpoints are in Iran's 6th house. So the 12th house, where Chiron is transing through, that's the house of self-undoing and hidden enemies, traditionally. And the midpoints will be activated there in the 6th house, which have to do with health, among other things. The 6th house is when you have to sort of pay back all the karma you've accumulated. You have to make adjustments as a result of your past actions, and that can result in some pain or some illness of sorts. So, transiting Chiron, activating the midpoints, uh, that adds fuel to the fire, can result in more wounding and conflict for Iran. Let's hope that things do not expand into a larger regional war. They may or they may not. Iran could have external or internal problems. It may handle them well or may handle them badly. Either way, I'm just giving a weather report. I'm reporting that those stresses, those tensions are going to be present at a certain time. Okay, now let's look at, in particular, at the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. There is a lunar eclipse on March 25th of 2024, but the aspects I'm going to look at, they're in effect during both periods. And so I'm going to focus just on the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. Now, here's the main thing. If we look at outer planets from Jupiter through Pluto with the exclusion of Saturn, at these eclipse times, things are going to be in pretty much the same position. So here I have a chart showing those planets where they're positioned on October 14th solar eclipse, on the October 28th, 2023 lunar eclipse, then again on the March 25th, 2024 lunar eclipse, and again on the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. All of these planets are in pretty much the same position, which means that the tensions that are present now are going to be pretty much the same when we go through these eclipses in March and April of 2024. Okay, looking just at the solar eclipse for April 8th of 2024, this is going to be a very momentous one, a very big one. Why? Well, it's because we have the moon, the sun, and Chiron all exactly conjunct to the minute at 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. This will impact the entire world and some countries in particular. This can make next year either the year of wounding or, if we're lucky, the year of healing and the year of transcendence. However, I think all of those things are going to happen, but for the masses, it may be more wounding that we see. Also on this day, we've got Mars conjunct Saturn in Pisces. That is a very dangerous composition because Saturn restricts things and Mars is, of course, the traditional god of war. So this could create a lot of conflict next year. We also have Jupiter conjunct Uranus. Since those planets are in Taurus, this may work out more in the financial sector or more in terms of supply chains. Jupiter expands things, Uranus brings about sudden changes. This could be change for the better or the worse. We also have Neptune conjunct Venus. I'm not quite as worried about that one. It's an out of sign conjunction. Neptune is in Pisces, where it usually functions well, provides vision, but also could provide misinformation. Venus is in Aries, where it doesn't do well, it gets a little bit more aggressive. Uh, but the really worrisome things are the strong conjunction between Sun, Moon, and Chiron, and the tight conjunction between Saturn and Mars. That brings about increased likelihood of conflict and wounding for the entire world. Now, if we look at how the solar eclipse is going to affect Israel, well, the main thing is we still have transiting Uranus activating that Sun Chiron opposition. Okay, so that can bring about wounding either internally or externally to Israel. But again, if we're lucky, it brings about transcendence, a light into the nations. Now, I want to point out that transiting Uranus will be stationary direct at 19 plus degrees Taurus on January 26, 2024. That is a time when it won't be activating the Sun Chiron opposition so much. That opposition is going to be strongest on November 5th and April 13th of 2024, November 5th, 2023. That is when transing Uranus is exactly opposite natal Chiron, and then transing Jupiter that you see right here, it's going to be exactly opposite natal Chiron on April 19th. So on October 8th, we're repeating some of the same conditions that we're seeing now in Israel's chart, and also around the October 14th solar eclipse and October 28th so lunar eclipse of 2023. We're seeing the same condition being repeated on April 8th of 2024, but in between, Uranus moves retrograde. It moves away from activating this opposition so strongly, and that's when we may get a little bit of a lull or a pause in the current situation. On the other hand, if we look to see how this October 8th, 2024 solar eclipse will affect Iran, we see big problems ahead. Sun, Moon, and Chiron all exact at 19 degrees 24 minutes of Aries, exact conjunction. And look at this. That opposes Iran's Pluto, which is at 19 degrees 6 minutes of Libra. So just minutes of separation between Sun, Moon, Chiron, and an exact opposition to Pluto. Pluto represents death, destruction, also transformation. It's in Iran's sixth house, which has to do with health. This can bring about a lot of wounding to the country. Doesn't necessarily come from Israel or the US. It could be internal or external. But this is telling us of some really bad weather ahead for Iran. And to make matters worse, this conjunction of transiting Saturn and Mars, it's going to be opposite Iran's natal Saturn. And transiting Jupiter transiting Uranus is going to be opposite natal Uranus and square the sun in Iran's chart. And transiting Pluto is going to be in a very strong opposition to natal Jupiter in Iran's chart. So, from an astrological weather point of view, this is really, really bad weather for Iran during the time of, uh, let's see, the solar eclipse. And I still have October here. Sorry about that. That should be April 8th, 2024. Solar eclipse, you can see over here, the date April 8th, 2024. But this shows there is a great likelihood of either internal or external conflict and wounding for Iran at this time. And because it's a solar eclipse, the impact of this can extend for several months to come. So sorry about October. Just in your mind, scratch through that and write April 8th, 2024. Okay, so here's the bottom line. The current conflict between Israel and Hamas could subside after November 2023 if we're lucky. I keep trying to say luckily today. I don't know why. If we're lucky, they could subside after November 2023. But tensions and existential threats, either internal or external, could escalate again for Israel from March through May of 2024. We just have to keep an eye on things. Remember, this is a weather report. No events are for certain at this point in time. For Iran, though, tensions and threats may be at their greatest from March through June of 2024. Again, we have to keep an eye on things. The weather is looking really bad for Iran, particularly in April, around April 8th of 2024. Evidence may turn up that shows that they were a big part of this current war between Israel and Hamas. It's the attack by Hamas, or we may find evidence to the contrary. Either way, there are threats ahead for Iran, so we have to keep an eye on things. Okay, and that should be the end of this presentation. So I will stop sharing my screen. That's it. Again, I want to emphasize this is a weather report. Nothing is written in stone. People can always take the high road instead of the low road. So let's always hope for the best, not only hope for the best, but work for the best. And we can always do that by being kind to ourselves and being kind to others, contributing to efforts that provide humanitarian help to all people who are suffering, and by encouraging our politicians to do the right thing and to pursue peace and avoid war and conflict as much as possible. So that's it. I'll stop recording at this point, and I hope to see you again. And in the meantime, I hope you're well, and I hope you continue to be well. So long and be well.